All right, let's get right into it. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're zeroing in on a massive weekend of shifts across tech, the economy, and Washington, distilling it all into one clear briefing. If you want to understand the macro forces driving our world right now, you are exactly where you need to be.
So here is our roadmap. We're going to move quickly from the rapidly accelerating future of technology to the immediate realities of our economy, sudden institutional shakeups, and finally the current political landscape. Let's jump in.
Starting off with Section 1, the always-on AI era.
There is a pretty wild contrast happening globally right now. On one hand, you have American founders who are quite literally losing sleep trying to manage their new always-on AI agents. But across the globe, massive Chinese AI labs, places like ZeedAI and Moonshot AI, which are valued in the tens of billions, are rapidly closing the capabilities gap. It is basically a story of pure human exhaustion going head-to-head with massive institutional acceleration.
To really get a sense of this human cost, you have to hear this. 27-year-old Aditya Sharma, who co-founded a company called Keel, recently worked until 6 a.m. Why? Because the cost of his AI agents getting blocked for 8 hours is just too high. He said, and I quote, "They just demand your attention. Does it need anything? Can I help it in any way?" It's incredibly ironic, right? We thought we'd delegate to machines and hit the beach, but instead, the machines are keeping the humans awake to clear their bottlenecks.
And pushing the pace on the other side of the world, we have Tang Ji. He's a Tsinghua University professor and co-founder of Z.AI. He and his former students are building AI models so incredibly fast that US pioneers are genuinely looking over their shoulders. It's sparking serious, urgent conversations in both Silicon Valley and Washington about how they're moving at this speed and honestly, whether this poses a real national security risk.
Which brings us perfectly to Section 2. Treasury fights the bond market.
So while tech founders are fighting sleep, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent had a completely different battle this week. Just look at this timeline. By Tuesday, investors were totally on edge, pushing long-term yields to near 2-decade highs. To cool things down, Bessent threw a major curveball on Wednesday, announcing double buybacks for long-term bonds. And it seemed to work, but only for a minute. By Thursday and Friday, investors essentially said no way, and snapped those yields right back up to where they started. That Treasury victory? Completely fleeting.
And that brings us to this number, which explains exactly why the market is sweating: 5.3%. Earlier in the week, the 30-year Treasury bond yield topped that mark, the highest we've seen in nearly 20 years. And remember, this isn't just Wall Street trivia. Treasury yields set the floor for borrowing costs on everything: mortgages, student loans, you name it. When this number climbs, the whole economy feels the squeeze.
But wait, right in the middle of all this Treasury intervention, a massive, frankly unwelcome milestone hit. Gross U.S. debt crossed $40 trillion for the very first time. It completely stole the spotlight from the buyback maneuver and dragged everyone's attention right back to the glaring issue of the federal deficit.
Because at the end of the day, investors are deeply, deeply anxious. And it's a perfect storm. It's not just mounting federal debt. You've got exploding corporate bond issuance from AI hyperscalers like Amazon and Alphabet gobbling up capital. You've got persistent inflation fears, plus a ton of uncertainty around how the new Fed chairman is going to handle interest rates. Add it all up, you get one seriously jittery macroeconomic environment.
Moving on to Section 3, Shakeups in Housing and Defense. We need to talk about some very sudden institutional shakeups, starting with the housing market. Roughly a dozen high-ranking officials were just let go at Fannie Mae. We're talking multifamily loan officials, low-income housing executives, finance, regulatory, communications, the whole shebang. Fannie Mae backs a massive chunk of the U.S. mortgage market, so when you see a leadership purge of this scale under Federal Housing Finance Agency head Bill Pulte, it absolutely raises immediate questions about market stability.
Meanwhile, over at the Pentagon, we're seeing a totally different kind of exit. Army Secretary Dan Driscoll is expected to step down by the end of the year. Over his 18-month tenure, he was a massive advocate for bringing commercial tech to the military, securing over $25 billion in private company pledges to build things like data centers and critical mineral refineries right on Army bases.
But this departure isn't happening in a vacuum. It follows months of reported tension with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. And here is the kicker. Because the Army's Chief of Staff was fired earlier this year without a nominated replacement, Driscoll leaving means the Army is going to be operating with a major leadership vacuum, completely without a Senate-confirmed leader at the top.
Finally, let's dive into Section 4, Trump's second-term friction.
As President Trump navigates his second term, the friction is palpable. For Democrats, if they manage to win back the House, they face a massive strategic dilemma. Do they come right out of the gate pushing for a third impeachment? Or do they pivot and focus entirely on kitchen table issues, like lowering prices for voters? Some lawmakers are actually terrified of a voter backlash if they go all in on impeachment again.
Regardless of where they land on impeachment, House Democrats already have nearly a dozen potential investigative targets lined up. They're zeroing in on alleged conflicts of interest. Everything from the handling of the Iran war, the Trump family's foreign business dealings, crypto ventures, defense contracts going to close allies, and actions taken by federal immigration officials. And the White House, well, they've made it clear they are already gearing up for the subpoena fights.
There is also some literal, physical friction happening right on the White House lawn. We're talking about the new 90,000-square-foot White House ballroom project. Lower courts actually ruled the president bypass Congress on this, but the Supreme Court just stepped in with an administrative stay, allowing construction to continue for now during the appeals process. The administration's argument? They say it's vital for national security, and, well, it's already 65% finished anyway.
Out in the real world, though, folks are feeling a different kind of friction. At the grocery store, look at the stubborn inflation hitting a staple for almost every family: ground beef. Prices have just kept climbing through 2024 and 2025, hitting a record $6.89 a pound in July of 2026. And the wild thing is, it's not just general inflation causing this. We started the year with the smallest U.S. cattle herd since the 1950s, driven by years of brutal droughts and tough financial times for ranchers.
So what is the policy response? To fight these grocery prices, President Trump just announced a temporary 90-day plan. The U.S. is going to allow up to 300,000 metric tons of foreign ground beef into the country tariff-free. The goal is to get that beef on shelves at about 25% below current market prices. But as you might guess, domestic cattle ranchers are fiercely opposing this. They argue that flooding the market with cheap, imported beef is going to completely gut their ability to rebuild the American herd.
So let's take a step back and look at the big picture here. From sleep-deprived tech founders wrangling AI, to a mind-boggling $40 trillion national debt, to shifting political battle lines and the soaring cost of a hamburger, things are moving incredibly fast. It leaves us with one massive lingering question. As technology races forward and economic debts climb, how on earth will our political and economic institutions adapt to manage these cascading pressures? Thanks for tuning into this explainer, and we will catch you next time.